but Israel will not release that. And so from Damascus, it would be nothing to shoot weaponry into Israel. It hasn't been done yet because of the fear of repercussions. Now, there's other rockets being sent in, but the big one that could come from Hezbollah in those military sites around Damascus, all of those have been stopped so far. That's not to say that they won't try in the future, and we need to be watching that. Now, if a city of 8,000 or 10,000 years old becomes a ruinous heap, what does that make you think of in today's language? Nuclear or biological or something bad. Something really bad that we know is going to come in and make an area like Chernobyl to where no one would be able to live in it again. Can you see a time, and I'm not telling you this is how it's going to play out, but can you see a time when Hezbollah sends a rocket into Israel? Israel has had enough. Israel has nuclear weapons, and Israel says, no more. Can you see a time when that would happen? Now, there would be a huge price to pay for that. Would that start the events of the end time scenario? We don't know. We don't know. But it certainly is interesting to see in our day, if you get on a map and just look at it, if you listen to the TV or to the radio or you get online and you watch these things happen, you can see how it would very easily play out. And yet these guys are writing about these events 2,500 years ago or longer in the case of Isaiah.
Even yesterday, the UN was lining up with the Golan Heights do not belong to Israel.
Yes.
And they should be destroyed.
There is no other country, with the exception of, I want to say the United States accepts it, but I don't know that for 100% sure, but I think they do. But there is no other country that accepts the Golan Heights as Israel's. Even though, and so they're frantically building settlements, Jewish settlements all in that area.
They've got 140.
Yes, Jewish settlements in that area. And that is causing huge difficulty for the nations of the world when, as they see what is happening, as Israel lays claim to that. But that land is necessary for the safety and security of Israel. They need to have that land. And so nothing is stopping them, and they will just continue to build the settlements. When you hear discussion about the settlements, it's even in the new peace plan that President Trump has sent out. By the way, I loved that you sent me. When you see that and you recognize that that land is something that Israel cannot turn loose of for their own security, you'll understand why it is that none of the past peace things have worked. And yet no nation will say that that is Israel's. Isn't that amazing?
When you stand on the Golan Heights and look down, all of Israel is vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Is you can see all the kibbutz, and that's what they were doing. They were just firing and just killing.
Absolutely.
Wiping them out.
And so if a big one were to come from Hezbollah, if a big one were to come in there and do some real massive damage in Israel, you could certainly see retaliation happen very quickly. Interesting. All right, we live in amazing times, you guys. All right, so all of this is to show that God demands that the Gentile nations see Israel, the nations, for what she is. A nation of people chosen by God and consecrated for his service, the apple of his eye. They are warned that if they go against Israel, they go against God. Even so, without warning, they will go against Israel, and the Lord will demand justice. You guys, there are so many prophetic scriptures that we could read that talk even today about nations who will go against Israel and what will happen in the end times to the nations who go against his people. And we know that in the end, Israel will be without a friend. We don't know how the United States or Canada or some of these other places are going to pull apart. Canada, maybe we see more now of, but the United States, let's just stay at home. We have difficulty seeing how that would happen. But we are told that Israel will be without a friend. There will be not one nation in the entire world in the end times who will stand with Israel. Why?
God.
Because God says, I want them to know that it is I who will deliver them. Not the might and power of America, not the might and power of any other country, but that I, God, will come against all odds and deliver them. Isn't that amazing? So when you watch the EU or the UN or any of those other things, and you see all of these nations go against Israel all the time, more so than any other nation in the world, including those who have terrible, terrible human, what's the word I'm
Human
looking?
rights.
Human rights for their countries that are very destructive, even more so than any of those. Recognize it's a spiritual battle. It doesn't make any sense. It's a spiritual battle. Ezekiel 39, I will display my glory among the nations, and all the nations will see the punishment I inflict and the hand I lay on them. From that day forward, the people of Israel will know that I am the Lord their God. And the nations will know that the people of Israel went into exile for their sin because they were unfaithful to me. So I hid my face from them and handed them over to their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanness and their offenses, and I hid my face from them. Ooh, what a sad thing. But recognize he doesn't say I cut them off or turned my back. He says I hid my face from them. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will now restore the fortunes of Jacob and will have compassion on all the people of Israel, and I will be zealous for my holy name. They will forget their shame and all the unfaithfulness they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with no one to make them afraid. When I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies, I will be proved holy through them in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. For though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind. I will no longer hide my face from them, for I will pour out my spirit on the people of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. Wow, is that powerful? That is very powerful. God is also very clear that if he demands justice from the Gentile or pagan nations of the world, he is also going to demand justice from Israel. Since she was a people called by God, led by God, covenanted to God, much more would be demanded from the people. They would not escape judgment for their sins simply because they were the chosen people of God. All right. Interesting stories in Jeremiah. Well, there's this strange story of a waistband that Jeremiah was to hide in the crevice of the rocks. Get a load of this. In Babylon. So 1,600 miles away, God sends Jeremiah to hide a waistband in the rocks of Babylon. There is the potter's clay, the story where Jeremiah is thrown into a cistern of mud to slowly die, but then he's rescued by King Zedekiah. Jeremiah will be beaten, tortured, and held in stocks for his message. It's chapter 38 where that mud story is. He is rejected and starved. He is rejected and imprisoned. He is going to wear a literal yoke of wood, and then he is going to wear a literal yoke of iron to signify to the people the captivity of Judah. God leaves no stone unturned to show his people what lies ahead. But the righteous branch, the Messiah of Israel, is promised, and the good news that God will establish a new covenant, one that is written on the hearts of the people, is given in Jeremiah 31. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it in their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. So this new covenant, just really quickly, I just want to make a couple of comments about that. We're going to see many of the prophets discussing this new covenant. This new covenant is the one that is not going to be established until the time of Jesus, when at his Last Supper, he says, this is the blood of the new covenant established in my blood. And so this new covenant is going to be something that they have never seen before. It's no longer going to be written down for them, but now God is going to write it on their hearts. How do you do that? Because God lives within us now. It's a new thing, something that they could not even imagine as they were trying to read on these scrolls the words of God. And yet this new covenant is promised to whom? It's promised to Israel, isn't it? This is their promise that a new covenant is coming. And yet, we are in that new covenant. We are also brought into that new covenant where now God writes it upon our hearts, his desire for us. How does that happen? How is it that a promise to Israel becomes your promise? Okay, because we're grafted in to the tree of Israel, right? And so we all absorb the nutrients from the same roots. We have Jewish prophets that teach Jewish law, that tell us about a coming Jewish Messiah who comes to the Jewish people in a Jewish ministry and brings 12 Jewish men to go out and speak the word. Isn't that just remarkable? And God says, now, here's the new covenant. I'm going to bring one new man together in this new covenant. It's going to be Jew and Gentile, man and woman, slave and free, all together in Messiah. One new man in Messiah. So we're grafted into that tree. We have that same promise from the roots and the sap that were given to Israel. Isn't that amazing? And it should, in fact, unify us to the nation of Israel, shouldn't it? It should, in fact, knit our hearts together with Israel and with the people. But what has the enemy been able to accomplish with that very covenant?
The only reason that we were grafted in is because Israel rejected it.
Because they were blinded.
So they didn't deserve it.
So many were broken off. Many of the natural branches were broken off, but not all of them. There's a faithful remnant that was left on the tree. And then we as the wild olive branches, that's us girls, we're wild, we're grafted into that same thing, into that same root. And so instead of becoming one new man in Messiah the way that the new covenant was to do, what ended up happening? Well, just as in the Old Testament, we see Israel separating itself from anyone else, not being the light of the nations to show the one true God to the nations, not fulfilling that plan. So too, we in Christianity have done the same. We have alienated ourselves from our Jewish brothers and sisters. We have felt no obligation to go out. The natural branches of Israel, whose roots we consume and are grafted into, that knitting together was broken apart. Even though Paul in Romans 9 through 12 says, don't do that. Don't think you're better. Don't make the same mistake. But the enemy was able to do that, and we have been the worse for it. It is not the fullness of what God had planned for us. Conclusion. In Jeremiah 33, God tells Jeremiah, call to me and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things which you do not know. Even though Jeremiah was shackled and imprisoned at the time, God instructed him to call to me and that he would hear that cry. The entire book of Jeremiah is filled with both despair at the judgment of the Lord and then with praise for the promise of a coming restoration. God will never fail to hear his people. God will never fail to seek out his people. God will never fail to fight for his people. God will never fail to recompense those who harm his people and reward those who support his people. Remember that punishment or discipline is given for our good, and it's a sign of love. We must not think that punishment is to destroy or even beat down our lives. It is to grow us into a righteous people who seek the face of God. We don't want God's face to be turned from us. We seek the face of God. God may allow temporary discipline, but it is only for a season. He never leaves those he loves hopeless or helpless. He never walks away. The pattern of God throughout Scripture is so clear. It's the scarlet thread. It's the reason for our study. And it's the perfect Valentine. How about that? See what I did there? All right.
You're good.
Yeah. The scarlet thread. This is what God says in so many different words over and over again. Turn from your evil ways, my beloved. Repent of the wrong you have done. Turn back to me and seek intimacy with me. My heart is knit to yours, and I desire to bless you with great blessing because of my hesed, my ever faithful love. Come stand beneath my wing of protection, and I will cover you with my hand of mercy. Always remember that my love for you will endure forever.
What's the reference for that?
That's just
Did you make
me.
that?
That's just me.
You.
That's not
Oh.
Scripture. That's why it's purple and not red.
That's beautiful, Kathy.
But that is the message over and over that we're going to see throughout Scripture. The book of Jeremiah, there's a couple of charts here for you to look at as you go over that. All right, we're going to run through Lamentations because it's very quick and it is part of the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah writes it at the very end of his book. Let's just look at it really quickly. Lamentations. It is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. It's only 5 chapters long, and it was written 586 to 585. The event, why was it written? It is the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. It is a very difficult book to get through in many ways. The outline of Lamentations, well, it's 5 chapters and it's organized into 5 poems. Each chapter is a poem. It's just interesting to note that it begins with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and ends with the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That's just simply Hebrew writing. It's just part of what they do. There are 5...
Each chapter does?
Each chapter. There are 5 sections. The first one is the destruction of Jerusalem. Second one is the great anger of the Lord. The third one is a prayer for mercy. The fourth one is the siege of Jerusalem. And the fifth one is a prayer for restoration. Well, why was it written? Lamentations has often been compared to a funeral dirge. Whose death? The death of Jerusalem and the great temple that Solomon had built 400 years earlier. Nebuchadnezzar had ransacked Jerusalem after years of great famine there. Everything was in ruins, and the people were either killed or taken into captivity. Despair was everywhere. It was felt deeply by everyone, and all seemed hopeless. It would appear to human eyes that God had left Israel never to return. It would seem that they were abandoned and alone. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet because of the tears that were shed for the demise of his beloved city, the temple, and his people. Even though he had spent 40 years urging the people to repent and turn back to the Lord, he is filled with great compassion, great sadness, when the destruction that he had warned about actually comes to pass. Now in Lamentations, Jeremiah does not blame Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar for Jerusalem's destruction. Jeremiah sees it for what it truly is. It's the righteous God dealing with Judah's flagrant and unrepentant sin throughout many generations. Much of Lamentations is written in the form of a repentant prayer, seeking mercy and forgiveness from God. Finally, Jeremiah rests in the knowledge that God is faithful and true, that his hesed is never ending. Although the hope of Israel seems at its dimmest, faith in God's goodness keeps the flame alive in the darkest days of Israel. Today, Lamentations is often read in synagogues all over the world on the 9th of Av. That correlates with our July, August, midsummer times, as a national day of mourning for the destruction of the temple in the days of Jeremiah. It is certainly interesting to note that the temple that would have been standing in Jerusalem during the lifetime of Jesus was destroyed by Titus on the 9th of Av in 70 AD. Now listen to this. Destruction came to both temples on the exact same day, the 9th of Av, 500 years apart.
Wow.
Mourning for those temples still permeates in the lives of religious Jews today. Facts about Lamentations. God will use Babylon as the instrument of Jerusalem's judgment. False prophets tried to disagree with Jeremiah and assure the people that God would never destroy them or his temple or his city. And the people chose to believe the false prophets over the word of God. When Jerusalem was captured, there was a massive number of priests, young men and women who were slaughtered. Chapter 3 of Lamentations is the personal cry of Jeremiah to his God concerning all of the unimaginable, terrible things that were happening. The punishment was indeed very harsh, but God spared his people from being obliterated only because of the great, everlasting, never-ending love that he had and still has for them. Now, one of the verses in Lamentations 1:16 says, "This is why I weep, and my eyes overflow with tears. No one is near to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. My children are destitute because the enemy has prevailed." It makes you think of Luke 19:41 through 42. As Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now is hidden from your eyes. Days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side." Jeremiah and Jesus had something in common. Both wept great tears over the sin of his people. Both knew that the destruction would soon come, although each man had provided a way to avoid it. Both men were brokenhearted, for those who will not hear, will not obey. The desire of the Lord is to provide a way for reconciliation, to have his people turn back to him so that he may pour out blessing on those that he loves. Even in the midst of our darkest days, God is faithful. That is the only thing that we can count on and be sure of. The overriding theme of Lamentations, the short little book of grief and despair, is found in chapter 3, 22 through 23. Through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed, because his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. That in the midst of Lamentations. Charles Spurgeon said, "The glory of God's faithfulness is that no sin of ours will ever make him unfaithful." All right, any questions? You can turn it off. Any questions? Anything